Good evening. I'm Graham Allison, the director of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and it's my great pleasure to welcome home our colleague, Ash Carter, the Undersecretary of Defense. Ash is, I think, the perfect model of a Kennedy School product and a Belfer Center colleague, a person who began life as a physicist, soon became fascinated by policy, came to the Kennedy School as an assistant professor. Al Carnesale and I recruited him, but Paul Doty actually had found something about him earlier, as usual. He grew up to be a professor. He was the director of the center that's now the Belfer Center. He served as Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Clinton administration, when he and I both worked for John Deutsch and Les Aspin and Bill Perry, among others. And when President Obama was elected, he chose Ash to be the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. So about $700 billion of activity go through his office every year, 700 billion. So in government even, that's a lot of money. And when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was here in December, says the number one threat to American national security is the deficit, managing $700 billion becomes even more interesting. So we look forward to welcoming Ash home and what he has to say.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks to all of you. I see so many faces, wonderful faces, familiar faces. It's great to be here, and I especially want to thank Graham Allison, not only for having me here this evening and for leading this school, the Belfer Center, important parts of the Department of Defense in a previous administration, but for what he continues to do for the department. In the way of advising. A number of others here do that as well, and it's very much appreciated. The occasion of my visit is the meeting of the Belfer International Council, and I want to acknowledge all the distinguished members of the council that are here, and I look forward to seeing you all later this evening. But I want to address myself, if I could, now. I see Joe Nye, John Deutsch, Al, God, John, go on forever. But I really wanted to address myself to the students tonight first, because kind of a recruiting pitch, I guess. I salute you, those of you who are thinking about via your education here at the Kennedy School, a career in public service. And I just want to say that I see Kennedy School students every day, everywhere. I was in the Japanese Ministry of Defense about a month ago, and the minister said, "Come with me for a minute." I walked down the hall, he opened the door, and in there are 20 Kennedy School students working in the Japanese Ministry of Defense. All said, "Oh, hi, Professor Carter, I remember your class," or somebody else's class. And everywhere in not only the US government, governments everywhere around the world are the products of this great institution. And it's really heartening to see them all out there giving themselves to public service. And I just want to say to those of you who are thinking about it, it's bruising and all that and demanding. But at the same time, you have the satisfaction of working for something that's bigger than yourself. And if you're even bigger than this great nation, if that's who you're serving, because it's about peace and security around the world. And that's a pretty special mission, and it inspires everybody in the national security field. We don't have the glass and stainless steel buildings and the payrolls and so forth that you can get elsewhere, but we do have the mission. And that attracts a lot of people, including those of you who've come here to the Kennedy School. And it is what makes public service so special. I encourage you to stick with it. I hope you do. I hope you decide to make a career of it. And if you choose the Department of Defense, I hope you'll give consideration to the part of it that I run now, which is the Undersecretary of Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Now, apart from having the longest title, and my daughter who's here tonight says it's too long and nobody's ever heard of it. Why can't you be CIA director? But what do we do in this part for you as you look about possible employment in the future? Let me do a little pitch here for it. Number one for us, and I'll say more about this, is support to the ongoing conflicts in which we find ourselves in the areas of acquisition technology and logistics, and I'll say more of that. So whether it's buying intelligence aircraft for Afghanistan, shipping armored vehicles through the ground lines of communication that come up from Pakistan into Afghanistan, building dining halls and new bases, whatever it is, rapid response, logistics, contractors on the battlefield, we do that all. We develop and buy all major weapon systems and information systems. We manage DoD's installations worldwide. We're the largest operator of real property in the world. Our technology base and our laboratories that make up the defense technology base, we manage them. Our nuclear, chemical, and biological defenses, our nuclear deterrent, missile defenses, energy, environment, a whole host of things. We're kind of the implementers, we're the doers in the Department of Defense. It's a very exciting place to work, and I hope those students who are here who are contemplating a career in government will consider our part of it. Friday night, the government almost shut down, and it was midnight or so when we got the word finally that the show was going to go on. And obviously, there's a budget war raging now in Washington, and for us, that means that we have an extra burden to prove to the taxpayer that we are spending that $700 billion that Graham spoke about in a manner that Secretary Gates said at the Eisenhower Library last year is respectful of the taxpayer at a time of economic and fiscal distress. And that's a responsibility we take very seriously, and I want to say something about how we're trying to discharge that responsibility. That's job two for me and for us. Job one is to support the ongoing conflicts that we have today, the real wars, not the budget wars. They're what we wake up to every day. And then third, there are the wars that might be, that we don't want to be, the conflict of the future. And it's obviously part of our duty to think about them also and to make sure we're addressing future security threats. And I'll talk about all three of these tonight. But let me start with what job one is, which is the ongoing conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, now Libya, humanitarian mission in Japan, global war against terrorism and so forth. Let me start there. And I brought along a few pictures for two reasons. First of all, a picture tells a story and is a substitute for a lot of words. The other is that my old colleague from Stanford, Bill Perry, came here a little while ago and gave a very popular talk and used pictures, and I learned about that from my daughter, and so I brought along some pictures also. And let me start with one. There she is. That's Lucy. Meet Lucy. Lucy is that dog there. This is a patrol, Marine Corps patrol, about to go out on patrol in southern Afghanistan in the Helmand province area. And Lucy's on a leash right now, but Lucy does her work unleashed. And what Lucy does when you take the leash off is walk in front of this patrol of soldiers. And Lucy's has a sensor on her that we cannot equal in any other way, that is better than anything we can build, which is her nose. And she's very good at smelling homemade explosive, which is akin to fertilizer. So you understand why Lucy's attracted to that. And Lucy will walk down in front of you, sniff around, and when she encounters homemade explosive, exhibit a characteristic behavior. In her case, it was to sit. And I start there because you think about the defense budget and the challenges of buying things as about tanks and planes and ships and so forth. Not really so in the day-to-day life of support of supporting ongoing conflict. I am now very much in the market for dogs like Lucy. And how do you buy dogs? You have to find a kennel. There has to be a trainer. They have to, different breeds do different things. And there are leash dogs and unleashed dogs and so forth. And so I am now globally sourcing explosive sniffing dogs. And I spend a lot of time on that. It may seem like a small thing, but it's not a small thing to those Marines. It is the principal thing that keeps them safe every day. Another picture here. This is a MRAP all-terrain vehicle. This is a armored vehicle designed specially to protect the soldiers within the capsule atop the chassis from the effects of homemade explosives, which are now being used by our enemies everywhere in Afghanistan. And it's an all-terrain vehicle because Afghanistan's so different from Iraq. Iraq, we had MRAPs, but they didn't have independent suspension. Afghanistan, mountainous, very rugged terrain. Iraq, flat. And in the summer of '09, as we were going, it was clear we were going to go into Afghanistan. The president made the decision actually in December of that year. There were no MRAP ATVs in Afghanistan. That June 30th, I guess, I signed the purchase order for MRAPs, and we started to produce them at the rate of about 1,000 a month. We didn't actually know how we could field that many at that time. There are now 7,000 MRAP ATVs in Afghanistan, and you can go to Walter Reed or Bethesda Hospital, as I do, on weekends and visit with soldiers and their families, troops and their families, and every single time find people, young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who are alive because that vehicle is there. And we were able to do that within 2 years, produce them, field them, flying back and forth from Charleston, South Carolina. These things are made in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. We take them down to Charleston, put in the radios and other gear, flew them, C-17s, into Bagram and Kandahar until we filled up the capacity of Afghanistan to absorb. You have to bring soldiers out and train them and so forth on the vehicles. Then we began shipping them to the training centers for the troops that were going to rotate into Afghanistan so that they could be trained and have their driver's license by the time they got there. And what I said at the time was, I'm going to keep producing them as fast as I can. And my motto was, better an MRAP without a soldier than a soldier without an MRAP. And if we had them sitting in parking lots at Charleston, so be it. And the point of this is that the support to what we're doing every day it requires a management style for our major acquisition programs. It's very different from that which you associate with ships and planes and tanks. And with the acquisition system of the Cold War, which was an acquisition system that prepared but never did anything, thank God it didn't in the period of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. So it was one of constant preparation, not actual response to urgent operational needs. Very different world we live in today. Give me another example. I'm sorry, this is an MRAP in Iraq. I'm sorry, you can just see what the purpose of an MRAP here. This is one Iraq version, and you can see that a bomb has gone off under the right front axle, and the objective is to make sure that the soldiers in the back survive. Ditto, I'm sorry, my behind is in the way, but if we're out of the way, you can see this is an MRAP ATV in Afghanistan, same thing. Crew survives. You can see that the front of the vehicle, some of the steel plating is spalled off, and so forth. Another example. This is a Reaper, actually, a relative of the Predator. We fly them, there are about 100 of them in Afghanistan now. There will be 120 or 130 in another 2 months or so. It even can carry small missile on it, so it can strike as well as see, but most of them are designed to see. And as we were moving into Afghanistan, then commander there, who was Stan McChrystal, said one morning to me and Secretary Gates that he was only able to service 15% of the requests for overhead surveillance that he received from the field, 15%. And I realized at that point that there was no way I was ever going to satisfy that demand with more Reapers. We weren't going to put in 7 times as many. And so we began to think of other things, and I'll show you what we thought of and what is being done in Afghanistan today. This is a view from a helicopter, and we're flying towards a new base there. You can see it in the horizon there. That cleared area is a brand new forward operating base that we just built. It's in a place called Spin Boldak, which is in the south of Afghanistan near the Shaman Gate, which is one of the 2 major entry points from the east and from Pakistan, this time heading in towards Kandahar. And now Spin Boldak is a great example of an isolated base, relatively small base. We've now built hundreds of bases there in the last year and a half. Isolated base that would never, ever, ever be able to get Predator-Reaper coverage. There just isn't enough of it. Instead, over Spin Boldak is that, an aerostat, a tethered aerostat, which is a poor man's Reaper, but everybody can have one. We can afford to give one to everyone. And so over Spin Boldak, and now again many of our FOBs and COPs in Afghanistan is one of these balloons. And it's remarkable to listen as we can to the people's reaction in the area. This is something that can look down the road at a market and see whether the market's open, what's going on, surveil the road approaching the base. Is somebody burying an explosive there? Look around the perimeter of the base for the safety of the people on the base. It's a terror to the enemy, who we listened, and the balloon goes up and they say, what does that mean? And it must be looking at us all the time. It actually does not look everywhere all the time. But they don't know that, or they don't know where it's looking at any one time. And people who in a town nearby and so forth are comforted by it because it's always surveilling them and always protecting them. So I give you these 2 examples of, 3 examples of Bluesy and MRAP and Reaper as a style of, a style of response that is month by month, week by week. Not 10 years, not 15 years. It's 10 days, 15 days to get something that's good enough in so that we can be as effective as we possibly can be. It's very different from the 10 and 15-year-old programs of record, I'll come to them shortly, that drive the budget. But this drives lives and effectiveness, and so it's much more important in a sense than all those other programs that drive the budget. Not to be forgotten is the challenge of logistics. And I'll give you a few examples. This is Shaman Gate. This is the principal border crossing in the south between, just down the road from Spin Boldak. If you looked out that helicopter and just kept going a little bit to the left, you'd come to Spin Boldak, to the town of Spin Boldak and Wish and Shaman, which is the border crossing. That structure there in the middle, which you'll see again shortly, is the formal border crossing. On the other side, you see Pakistan. On this side, you're looking at Afghanistan, and you see all the containers there. Perhaps half of those are ours. They are carrying equipment up from Karachi, the port of Karachi, up, and the leftmost of those lines is the line going into Spin Boldak. The other one goes up to the Khyber Pass, so-called Torkham Gate. And those are 2 of the main routes through which we resupply the forces in Afghanistan. There are others in the north. We try to diversify so that we're never vulnerable to one. And of course, we continue to fly things in as well. This is the road to Shaman. If you just drive now from the fob that I was showing you, you drive in a Stryker vehicle, which is up there on the upper left, and approach the border crossing. We are delivering thousands of containers worth of equipment there every month. And so making sure that that border crossing is open and policed on the Pakistani side and the Afghan side. And this is, you see the tower back there in the back. And these are the Pakistani and Afghan border police and army officers who control that gate. And it's critically important to us that they continue to work with one another and that they continue to work with us to keep that open. Up north, fuel. This is Bagram now, Bagram up in the north. And we need fuel for our aircraft, for our vehicles, to run generators, which run the power at our operating bases. And there you see the trucks, fuel trucks, and the way we source fuel, which is another critically important part of logistics in Afghanistan, is this. You show up at the gate in your truck. We do not convoy, we don't buy, we don't ship it ourselves. It's all privately done. Somebody shows up at the gate, and we pay by the gallon, test the fuel, park the truck there a little bit. You see it parked among the HESCO barriers there just for a day or so, just to make sure that nobody has any other ideas than delivering fuel, and then take the fuel out. And you'd be interested to know that what we pay per gallon at Bagram is about what you pay at the pump here in Boston. The alternative is that, which we're doing a lot of, which is airdrop for isolated FOBs and bases, airdrop, the things in the netting. And for every month since last May, that is May of 10, we have been doing more airdrops in Afghanistan than were done in the whole Battle of the Bulge. Every month since last May. So I wanted to start there. I want to now turn to this question that everybody's reading about in the newspaper, which is the defense budget, which is in part driven by what you just saw, but mostly driven by other activities, other programs, and the management of that budget for our current security and our future security is what you expect to be attentive to the budget limits that we now face. We know we're not going to enjoy over the next decade the double-digit year-on-year growth that the Defense Department has enjoyed in the years since 9/11. That's not happening. This is at least one reason for it. You've all seen this, the deficit. And while we are not a driver of the deficit, we understand that we are a contributor to the overall budget situation. This is a familiar chart to any of you. The red part is the defense contribution to the annual budget of the United States. That's the red part, about 20%. If you took the wars away, it would be about 15%. So about a seventh of the federal budget going to national defense. So it's by no means the largest part, but it is a significant part, and we understand that we're expected to share in the responsibility of the nation to the deficit. That is what Admiral Mullen has been talking about. And we are going to manage to that result. The defense budget is going down. It will go down as the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, I don't mean to put an eye chart up there for you, but the defense budget as a whole is coming down. The part that is the base budget, which is the part that is not associated with the ongoing wars, we would like to and plan to have grow slowly in real terms over the next 5 years or so. That's President Obama's planned budget. It's robust, it's strong. We are, after all, involved in these wars, and the world remains a dangerous place. But we know we're not going to have the ever-increasing defense budgets of the last decade, and that we need to be attentive to the nation's other needs. And in recognition of that, it was Secretary of Gates way back last May who began to speak about the need for us to change the way we managed the defense budget. He called it, at the time, his efficiency initiative. And he asked me, as his acquisition executive, to devise a plan for that part of the budget, of that $700 billion defense budget, which is contracted out. Let me just do the math for you. $700 billion, $300 billion of that is people. It's the salaries of uniformed civilian personnel and their benefits, retirement, health, and so forth, and the buildings and so forth within which they work. The other $400 billion is contracted out, about equally for goods and services, $200 billion each, goods and services. And this was what led us to what we called better buying power, which Secretary Gates and I announced back in September. And it takes the form of guidance from him, through me, to those who manage that $400 billion of contract spend to deliver what we called more without more. We need more capability without more dollars. Now, obviously, you can cancel programs. You can stop doing things that you're doing. That's one way to save money. And we've done a great deal of that over the last couple of years, and we will have to do more. We've canceled many programs that were not performing, or whose time had passed, or where we had enough, came to judge that we had enough. And you know what they are. They're starting the presidential helicopter, the airborne laser, the Army's future combat systems, the next generation bomber, the transformation satellite, C-17, F-22, DDG-1000, all of which we brought to an end. But most of the programs that we now have that are underway are programs that we do want and do need. And so the challenge is to get them for what the money that the country can afford to pay us. And so how to do that? Well, how to do that, you need what the economists call productivity growth. You go to the Best Buy every year, you buy a computer. It's better than the computer you could have bought last year, and it's cheaper too. So why do I go to the Congress every year with the Joint Strike Fighter, the same Joint Strike Fighter as last year, but it's costing more? Where did productivity growth go in the defense economy? Norm Augustine, who was a great guy and is known to many people here, former chairman of Lockheed Martin, had his famous law of economic disarmament. He did the following calculation. He took the growth of the defense budget and the cost of fighter aircraft, and he concluded that in the year 2054, the entire defense budget of the United States would suffice to buy one tactical airplane. And Norm proposed that the Navy and the Air Force use that airplane on alternate days between Monday and Saturday, and that the Marines get to use it on Sunday. That's the fate that we need to avoid. And I want to give you some examples of how we can do that, because I think people are expecting that of us. Let me start with this. We can't start anything that is not going to be affordable. We can't start anything that we're not going to be able eventually to pay for. We don't want to find ourselves 10 years from now canceling things that we started. Here is the replacement for the Ohio-class missile-carrying submarine. We're about to replace the SSB&X, or the Ohio-class with the so-called SSB&X. And when the first cost estimates came into me for that replacement submarine, they had them at about $7 billion per submarine. And then if you went out into these would be built in the period between 2020 and 2030, about 12 such submarines. And were we to pay $7 billion for them in that period, we would build no other ships in the United States Navy. So said differently, that's not happening, right? $7 billion. So we had to go back to the design of the submarine and say, what is it that we can in what ways can we change this design in the interests of affordability without compromising critical military capability, get ourselves an affordable replacement for the Ohio-class submarine? And so we looked at all the things that were driving the design, the number of missile tubes, the diameter of the missile tubes, the degree of stealth, the flank speed of the vessel, and so forth, and worked that design. We're now down to about 5.7 en route to 4.9, which is my target for SSB&X. That will be an affordable submarine. If we can, and we're not going to start it unless we get there. Similarly for the presidential helicopter. The presidential helicopter collapsed of its own weight a few years ago because it was too expensive. And President Obama's made it quite clear to us that he's not going to fly in $1 billion helicopter. So we're not going to produce one. Army's ground combat vehicle, the new bomber that we're starting this year, all of these things we're starting with an eye to the fact that we're just not going to have the money so that they have everything in them that everybody can think of. We have to make them affordable. Another big tool for us is competition. This is the Littoral combat ship. Let me tell you a little story about the Littoral combat ship. There are two models of this vessel. You can see those two designs. And last summer, I got the bids in from the builders of these two vessels for the next build of their ships. And I looked at them and I said, this is a bid, these are bids from builders who consider themselves entitled to build this ship. And so we said, all right, okay, time out. And we said, only one of you is going to build this ship. So go back and come in with a bid, a new bid, 10 ships. And they both went away, came back. Guess what? Bid's much lower. Competition at work. So much lower that we decided to buy from both of them. So they each came in with 10 ships, and we said, well, this is such a good deal, we're going to buy 20. So we're buying 20 Littoral combat ships. Now, we have recently completed a competition for the KCX tanker, KC-46 Air Force tanker. Successfully concluded that solicitation about a month and a half ago and saved billions of dollars in that competition. We know that because, as you probably know, unfortunately, there were several false starts at that competition in past years, and we know that we saved billions of dollars through competition. One party won, but their design and their bid, which are fixed price bids, we know we will save billions of dollars for the taxpayer. Where you don't have competition of the kind we have with LCS, for example, the Joint Strike Fighter, which is an airplane, 3 variants of it that we really do want to succeed and do need. We can't afford to build 2 of them and compete them against one another. And in cases like this, the performers of the work compete with themselves. That is, they compete for profit. It's just like if you're running a marathon. Most people who run a marathon are not running against anyone else. They're running against the clock, they're running against themselves, they're running for their personal best. So in these sole source situations like we have with the F-35, the trick is to make the performers of the work compete against self. That's what a share line does. If you overrun, you're going to pay half. We're not going to pay at all. If you underrun, you get half. You underrun $1, you get 50 cents of that. That's an incentive for productivity. So in these ways, we're trying to put productivity through competition and competition with self into the defense marketplace so that we can drive the cost of these programs down and make them affordable, recognizing that the country's not going to give us more money every year to deliver them. This is just a start. I've been talking about now our major acquisition programs. I already explained that the $200 billion of the $700 billion is for goods. Of that, $100 billion is tied up in these programs. So you have to look beyond the acquisition of these programs. 70% of the cost of a program like the Joint Strike Fighter over the life of the aircraft will be in the maintenance of the aircraft, not in the buying of the aircraft. So that's where the money is. And we need to look at how we're maintaining the fleets of aircraft, vehicles, ships, and so forth that we have, and how we're going to do that in the future. Another big thrust. Finally, I mentioned that half of our contract buy is not goods at all, but services. And these are mowing lawns at bases, dental and medical services, professional services, and so forth. $200 billion of spend annually, a lot of money, and we simply have to do better at delivering value for the services spend. So we're working on that as well. So in all of these ways, we're trying to do what I think the taxpayer expects us to do, certainly what the President and the Congress expect us to do, which is live within our means and still deliver the defense that the country needs and deserves. Can we succeed? I think we can, and I'll tell you a few reasons why that is. One is, we have very practical objectives, and we have a plan to achieve them in all of these programs. But it's also true that our habits in the decade of plenty led undeniably to some excess cost in all of these activities, and that is cost that can be removed with dedicated management. So it is entirely possible, in my judgment, to deliver the warfighting capability the country expects and needs for the money it can afford. Last thing I'll leave you with is these are the things that we're buying now. I've given you a few examples of them, rather traditional looking examples. The kind of equipment that we believe the nation will need for its security going forward. We need to be imaginative about that, however, because the pace of technology is changing and the missions are changing for us. And let me give you a couple examples of ways we're trying to catapult ourselves into the future. I started with Afghanistan, and there's a misapprehension that the United States is preoccupied with the Middle East, or that we can't do more than one thing at a time. And I'll give you a few pictures of what we're doing in Asia now, an arc that begins in Northeast Asia and goes all the way around to Southeast and South Asia. A few examples of some from a recent trip I took there. Let me just show you a few of these places. This is Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, and we have quite a upgrade going of Andersen. Now, Global Hawk just arrived, the long-range reconnaissance aircraft at Andersen Air Force Base. Down in the southwest, Andersen's in the northern part of Guam. In the southwest is Opera Harbor, the major naval facility at Guam, and there we're preparing to be able to berth an aircraft carrier. That will require us to do some dredging in the lagoon there and so forth, build some new port facilities and so forth, and there's a likelihood that we'll be repositioning 10,000 or so Marines into the northwestern corner of Guam. This is Camp Humphreys, a sketch of Camp Humphreys. Camp Humphreys now is just there a couple of months ago, has just a few plows out there and preparing the site. This is a city of 60,000 people that we're building in the Republic of Korea. That city with the gyms and schools and everything else will house the families of our troops on the Korean Peninsula, which signifies the permanence, from our point of view and from the point of view of the government of the Republic of Korea, of our presence on the Korean Peninsula. Joe Nye has written a lot about this. Heretofore, since the end of the Korean War, our troops have had only unaccompanied tours there. They couldn't bring their families with them. Now we want them to bring their families, and when they bring their families, we have to do this so that these people have a place to live and good schools and so forth to send their children to. This is part of a repositioning of our forces down from the DMZ, where they were at the end in 1953, at the end of the Korean War, south of the Han River. So I say this because I think there's a misapprehension that we are preoccupied with CENTCOM, and that is a perception that is concerning to me. Joe Nye's written about it recently. It's not true. We're doing a great deal in the Pacific, and we will remain the pivotal power in the Pacific. It's the fact that we were the pivotal power in the Pacific that allowed Japan first to rise, then Korea, now China. And that has been a fact of importance for that region, and it's not a fact that's going to change or is changing anytime soon. And the last thing I'll mention, which I don't have a picture of by the very nature of the beast, is the investments that we're making in cyber protection. An example of a future potential field of conflict. We want to be the best in that field. It's obviously a tricky thing for government to do because the technology in that field is largely driven from outside of the government. So those of us in government have to be very careful about how we make investments and how we plan to dominate that field from the point of view of offense and defense. And the principal thing that we're doing right now, and you see us even in this new budget making important investments there, is to make sure that we have a diversity of scientific effort going on in this field, that we don't have a monoculture, that we don't get too preoccupied with our own way of doing things. So we're deliberately creating diversity in the technology base for cyber, that's obviously more expensive than consolidation, but we're doing it because we think that's an intellectual necessity of the field of cyber warfare. So in all of these ways, the wars that are now, the wars that we hope never occur but might be, and one way to make sure that they don't occur is to make sure that we're ready for them. And in the management of the budget today, we're trying to be responsive to what we understand the country expects of us. That's the president's expectation of us in the department. And I think you can see that that is an expectation that we certainly understand and think is reasonable, but I think it's an expectation we can meet. We meet it with careful management and aggressive management, but it can be done. And I think that we will do a better job at explaining to the public the necessity of continuing investments in defense if we're also at the same time able to show them that we are attentive to the value of the dollar and getting value for the dollar. So thank you all very much for your attention tonight. Thanks for being here, and thanks to Grant for having me.
We'll do some questions.
Yeah, sure.
So the first question is, what does Ash do in his spare time? Since, the floor is open for questions. There are microphones here on both sides on the ground floor and also up at the loge. And let me get you to stand up. Put your question, identify yourself, put the question briefly. We have one speech at a time, only Ash tonight. And then he'll answer the question. And let's start, go ahead there, but we'll start with this loge. Here, please.
Right. Thank you, Secretary Carter. My name is Jason Israel. I'm a second-year Master in Public Policy student here. My question is about China. We've spent a lot of time studying China this year and our U.S. strategy toward China, and we found that there's a direct correlation between how much we're concerned about China's strategy, especially in the Pacific, and our acquisitions within defense. And I was wondering if you could comment on the tie between those, our lack of military-to-military direct relationship with China at the time, and if you see that improving and how that might be able to reduce our costs for things like SSBNX and the LCAS and things like that. Thank you.
It's a very good question. And the rise of China is a fact of great significance in the Pacific and in the world. And a betting person would say that the rise of China will not be accompanied by or necessitate conflict between the United States and China. Certainly we don't seek that. But at the same time, it's important, and I think Joe has written about this recently, that it be clearly understood that the rise of China is not a factor that is going to disrupt what has been a very good system in East Asia. I used the phrase earlier this evening of the pivotal power. The United States has been the pivotal military power, not to say the only or the dominant but the pivotal military power in East Asia for a long time. That's been very good for East Asia. And our remaining so is not inconsistent with the rise of Chinese military power. We have a very good relationship with the Chinese military. We seek to do more. Transparency is a great thing between militaries to make sure that everybody understands what I just said, which is that there's nothing inevitable, there's certainly nothing desirable about military conflict in the United States and China. At the same time, those expectations need to constantly be managed. And we manage them both through direct contact, and we manage them by showing, as I tried to indicate here, that the United States isn't going anywhere, and that our activities in East Asia are on the move as well, as they have to be. And that's not by any means something that's entirely about China. It's about the region as a whole. But it's something we can do, we will do, we are doing, and nobody should make any, should have any misapprehensions about that.
Thank you.
Let me pick up on that asterisk for a second and see if Joe wants to say something. He and I were out in China in January in a track 2 conversation when Secretary Gates was there. And one of the dramatic moments for me was Secretary goes to see Hu Jintao, the president of China, and it's a kind of a stilted, almost scripted situation. But in any case, he says, well, I was somewhat surprised when I arrived today and your forces disclosed your first stealth fighter. So here's Hu Jintao. His face doesn't move at all. Just he's looking like he's puzzled. So he turns to this guy beside him and whispers in Chinese, what the hell's going on, okay? This guy says, he don't know. Hey, what's the hell going on? He goes, 6 people down. Finally, there's a military guy there who smiles, okay? So now maybe this was stage managed, but otherwise it sounded like the communication wasn't too good. Just say what you want to say about it.
There is an interesting problem, Ash, as you know, that the party has full control of the military. No Chinese general can say something bad about Hu Jintao, but they have no operational control because basically the Standing Military Committee is not doing daily operational things, and 7 of the 9 members are military, and there's no NSC. So when you get to a case like Graham said, where Hu Jintao, the president, is sitting with Gates, and they test their stealth fighter, and who doesn't know about it, part of the reason is that there is no operational control. Mm-hmm. And that's really difficult and dangerous for us.
It is.
And so I wonder if you'd say a little bit about how we can deal with that.
I can, because the Secretary's described that moment publicly, Secretary Gates has, and the way he said it was, Hu Jintao rolled out the red carpet for me, and the PLA rolled out a new stealth fighter. So there's a disconnect there, and the scene was exactly as Graham described it, which is why it's important that, not everybody's going to get the word about how things need to go in order to go safely. And that's why showing a little bit by demonstration is an important thing to do. There is, we observe, that disconnect. And certainly the government of China, represented by Hu Jintao, has the same understanding that I opened with, which is this is not necessary, not inevitable, and certainly undesirable. And China's rise, like Japan's before it and Korea's before it on the East Asian stage, albeit much larger, is in part enabled by the fact that East Asia has had a security system that has been really ensured by the pivotal power of the United States. Joe, you know this very well. And that's a good thing, and we kind of keep a good thing going there. And every once in a while, somebody might not understand that and needs to be induced to understand that.
Up here in the loge, please.
Hi there, thank you. Mr. Carter, thank you for being here today. My name is Philip Acevedo, and I'm a sophomore at the college. My question is somewhat of a piggyback of this gentleman's, and it is basically, given the fact that China did unveil their new stealth fighter, and given the fact that China is militarizing and doing things like building an aircraft carrier, what do you see as how do you see the U.S. Either cooperating or competing with China for power in East Asia?
The best of all possible worlds is one in which we do not see the power of China and the power of the United States as competitive, but as I said, as complementary. We're certainly not going anywhere. They rolled out a stealth fighter. We're going to have 2,443 joint strike fighters. So I think the idea that the pivotal role of the United States will erode or is being eroded there just isn't so. It is not going to happen. China's military is increasing in size and sophistication, and that's absolutely fine. But everywhere we see anything that would erode our ability to be the pivotal power in the Pacific, we're taking steps, and you see them, whether they're in the Joint Strike Fighter or Camp Humphreys.
This gentleman, please.
Hi, my name is Sam White. I'm one of the two co-founders of Promethean Power here in Cambridge. We're a clean tech startup. And 2 weeks ago, Secretary Chu came to speak with us to kind of brainstorm around how to remove obstacles to entrepreneurs and startups, because they see startups as a good growth mechanism for the economy. And he mentioned something as an example of what they're trying to do. He mentioned something along the lines of an affirmative action for startups in terms of the military purchasing new technologies. We've developed a solar-powered refrigeration system for cold storage, and I'm very excited to hear from the source whether that's true.
Well, there is something to that. Of course, the expert on that is in front of us in John Deutsch. But here's what we can do that is consistent with our mission in defense, and that it complements the Department of Energy's activities. The Department of Energy does a lot of research in energy technology, which is good, and we don't try to match that in either size or quality. We are, however, a big user of energy in our vehicles, at our bases and installations around the world. Every building that we heat and air condition, wherever it is around the world, we would like to reduce that power bill like every other real estate owner would like to do. And so we are prepared to combine the Department of Energy's technology base with our base of vehicles, installations, and so forth, and where it makes sense for defense to be an early adopter of technology. And that might benefit the country overall. Now, we're only prepared to do that naturally with the defense dollar where it makes sense for defense. But it might make sense because of our scale and our particular needs to be an early adopter, and thereby to help a technology which is otherwise promising to get to scale and recognition where it can be more widely adopted in the economy. The other thing we're offering to the Department of Energy these days is our installations as a test bed. So they come to our bases and installations and can do demonstration projects and so forth, just because we have a lot of real estate, a lot of land, and so forth. So in those two ways, early adoption and the offering of facilities for test, we're trying to complement Secretary Chu's efforts, which are research-oriented and obviously directed towards adoption by the economy at large, not the defense economy. I mean, it does have to make sense for us in the context of the defense mission.
If you were a startup, how would you try to access that?
Well, you'd have to find a defense-relevant application that was attractive to us within the defense context, that we were willing to share the burden with the Department of Energy in some way to get that technology developed and then adopted.
And Ash, if I remember, you now have a new assistant secretary that works for you.
I do.
That does so-called operational
I
energy.
do.
whatever.
She's Sharon Burke, who's a wonderful person, has a really awful title. Everything gets turned into an acronym in the Pentagon, and she's the Director of Operational Energy, which spells dopey. So poor Sharon is our new dopey, confirmed by the Senate a few months ago. But dopey, she's not. She's on top of things, and it's Sharon who looks at Bagram's fuel prices. It's Sharon who looks at where we're air conditioning tents at Leatherneck in southern Afghanistan when it's 100 degrees in the shade, and you've got a circus tent. The Marines, when they first got there, had these big circus tents with 20 air conditioners all around the perimeter, trying to keep those guys cool. So we put spray insulation and so forth on the tents, because it not only costs money, but there's a penalty to the mission by being energy inefficient. So her job is to look where we can be, as her title, Operational Energy, suggests, more energy efficient in the operational sense. And she's doing that. Better generators and all kinds of things that really matter out in the field.
Please.
Hello, my name is Adam Brewer. I'm a prospective PhD student at the Kennedy School. And I'm curious if you can tell us if there are specific bodies of knowledge, skill sets, or issues that you recommend that students pursue in order to contribute to the next generation of dialogue on security and international technology. Technology and international security.
I'll give you one. While I was here, was a big fan, and with the help of Dean Elwood and Graham and others here, helped to create the International and Global Affairs concentration here at the Kennedy School. And the wellspring of that was the feeling that I had, but it was certainly shared by everyone here, that the Kennedy School in its birthing was very Washington-oriented. And the world as a whole is not Washington-oriented, and governance as a whole is not Washington-oriented. Washington remains arguably the most important capital in the world, but there are lots of other ones. We have an international student body, and we called it international and global in recognition of the fact that there are problems that are international, because nation states remain humankind's principal way of organizing themselves and pursuing public good together. But then there are global issues as well, and issues that can only be dealt with at a global level. So it's an attempt to get our students focused on those aspects of governance that were, by their nature, and increasingly international and global. And so were I in your shoes, obviously I have that bent. But that's where I would go. Now, there are lots of other great areas at the Kennedy School as well, and I don't want to make invidious comparisons to others who concentrate on other things here at the Kennedy School. But that is where I thought the sweet spot of growth was for the school. And if you choose a career in that, there are lots of other great things to do, healthcare and lots of other things that it's important to do, which are also universal in their own way. But that's the answer I'd give you.
Please, in the lodge.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Carter. My name is Nicholas Tatsis. I'm a senior at the college. There's obviously been a lot of attention in the public to cost overruns in defense procurement, and I was wondering if you could speak to the extent to which micromanagement in the purchasing process, be it through drawn-out hearings or additional layers of management, might drive up what could have been minor cost overruns that started as technical problems. Thank you.
Well, layers of management, surely not the answer. Micromanagement, I can be a little more attracted to. If what it means is we do exhibit cost overruns, and we're just simply not going to be able to pay those bills in the future. So if we want those defense articles, we're going to need to find a way to take cost out of those engineering and industrial activities. Some of that is incentive. I talked about that. Competition, profit incentives, and some of it is just better management. So in each of our programs, I'm doing something that I alluded to in the case of the Joint Strike Fighter, which is we have a budget planned for each of our major programs, which is a forecast of what we think that weapon system will cost. Those forecasts are based on historical data. They're therefore credible in that frame, but the forecasts are for unpayable bills. So I'm saying to people, I understand that that is the cost estimate, that's what we've laid into our budget, but that's not what I want you to manage to. I want a better number than that. And you just have to go through that program by program. You take a program apart, you say, why am I paying this much for the wing, this much for the center fuselage, this much for the combat system? What about the rates, labor rates, direct factored, the engineering, sustaining base? And so you go through the industrial activity that makes up the production of this particular defense article and chase out cost everywhere. We just have to do that, and there's a lot of room to do that given the climate from which we've come over the last decade. So I liken it to, you get the bill at the end of a meal, and you look at it and you say, well, geez, I didn't realize the broccoli side was $8. And I wouldn't have had 2 iced teas if I knew that they were going to charge me for both, and so forth. Well, I expect all of our program managers to be able to come to me with the bill for their program and explain and justify every item. Why are we paying that much? What were we paying for that 2 years ago? Why is it up? What has driven that up? What can we do to drive that down again? That is a lot of, I won't call it micromanagement, it is blocking and tackling program by program, and that's one of my responsibilities. That's one of the things I do.
So we have 2 last questions, the gentleman here and then finally Kevin, please.
Hello, Mr. Undersecretary. Thank you for coming. My name is Wilson Bornick. I'm actually a candidate at the Extension School for a master's. I spent 8 years in active duty as a logistics officer in the Navy. Expeditionary logistics is my background per se. And in that role, I've been a plug-and-play asset. I've worked at hospitals, I worked with special forces, SEALs, medical ships, everything. And so I could definitely give you an earful. And I know that you go back to the Pentagon and you sit in a room with people with heads bigger than mine and figure out solutions to these complex problems. And so if anything, as a junior officer, I would just like to make 3 recommendations. The first was, when I was on a bomb team in Iraq, the biggest problem we had was that playing well with other logistics officers across the field. And I've brought it up to 09s before that, hey, why don't we just have one logistics continuum starting at ground 01 all the way up? Instead of going to Navy Supply Corps school, maybe we have a joint purple school that's maybe 3 months long, then branch out from there. Now, of course, this absolutely made no sense 7 years ago. But now, given the current situation and having to play in the sandbox, I mean, I'm from the South. My folks taught me to share my toys with others. But unfortunately, not everyone likes to play like that. And I won't throw the Air Force under the bus, but definitely some issues there. The second one is, as a citizen who pays his taxes, as well as most people in this room, I'm sure, I understand the severity of the current fiscal crisis that we're in. And I really think that we kind of look at it with blinders on, if you will. And I understand that 2 of the biggest draws you mentioned are capitalization of ships, and the third one, which is my final point, is DoD benefits to active duty and reservists. The second one in regards to ships. Strategically, I understand the fleet is probably around 200, 300 ships. I don't know the exact number, but I know that we probably don't need that many. Having worked on an aircraft carrier myself, I know we have 12. Maybe, especially with the Chinese strategic balance in the weapons they use, maybe 7 or 8 is probably a more manageable number, more cost-effective for the American citizens in the room. And then finally, in regards to benefits, I am looking forward to getting my retirement package at some point as a reservist, maybe when I'm in my 60s, as it stands right now. I'm not really, to be honest with you, holding my, how do I say this politically? I don't expect it to be there, to be quite honest with you. And I understand that active duty participants do the full 20. They get their retirement when they're as early as maybe 38, 39. Now, I don't know if that's quite sustainable. And so I raised that question. As an American, if I did 20 years active duty, I would definitely take a cut in my active duty retirement benefit package. if I knew that it was going to a good cause, for example, getting us out of the mess we're in. And so I would just argue that maybe, I know it's not the popular decision or the popular play, but just a recommendation, and that's all.
I think they're all excellent points. I think you have something in each of those. Jointness in logistics is essential for efficiency. It's one of the ways we're going to get efficiency in logistics. We have done some of that. Most of our buying of commodities is done jointly by something called the Defense Logistics Agency, which works for me. And so every head of lettuce for the department is bought by DLA. The Navy doesn't buy its own heads of lettuce, and the Air Force its own heads of lettuce. And so we centralize buying so that the buying power of the department is concentrated. We get a better deal. Down where you get to spare parts and so forth, I'm sorry if this is boring to people, but logisticians like this kind of thing, there is not jointness, and there are therefore economies to be had. And I'll say one thing, health benefits, and in general, the $300 billion out of the $700 billion that goes for salaries and benefits is, like many private companies find, driving us into a place we can't go. And that is growing inexorably. And if it does, it will squeeze out the 400 remaining, which is what we buy military capability with. Now, we want to pay active duty and other uniformed people well because we want an all-volunteer force and we want quality in it. When you get to some other aspects of pay and benefits and so forth, we just can't keep going on this way without either raising the defense budget or squeezing out the other parts of the defense budget. So you're absolutely right.
Last question, Kevin Ryans. Introduce yourself. Kevin is the Executive Director of the Belfer Center and a retired Brigadier General.
Thank you, sir. And thanks, Dr. Carter, for coming here. So my question is about strategy. In 2001, when we started, we had a certain size Army, a certain size military, and a budget, and we thought we could do 2 wars roughly, defend the homeland, be present in important areas around the world. Now, we've tested that construct over the last 10 or 11 years, and we've changed our Army a little bit, we've changed our military, changed our capabilities, but looking forward then, with the realities that you've brought up tonight and that we're aware of, looking forward, how will our strategy have to change as America looks out over the next, say, 10 or 20 years?
Okay, well, it's a good question. It's a huge question. I think the general answer I'd give it to is a great deal, because the world's changing a great deal. We can't just sit where we are and keep doing the things that we're doing. So as we look out over our force structure, and the previous questioner made the same point about the size of the Navy and so forth, we can't simply recapitalize what we have and call that the future. We're going to have to do things differently. So that's the first observation. The second is that in that regard, even though it's unfortunate, and that's what really why, besides because that's where your heart has to be, I started with the support to current conflicts. I mean, it's a shame that we have to wage those conflicts. They are the great stimulator of innovation and change in the department, much more than any strategizing charts and so forth. They are driving us forward. We've made, take a look at Predator Reaper. That is part of the future. The sensors on those unmanned aircraft are part of the future, and we're doing them with the sophistication and dedication that we're doing them because we have to. And in that respect, and only that respect, the pace of conflict over the last decade has been beneficial for the department. And I point to my people and I say, how come we did the MRAP in a year? We delivered MRAP, and now in you come with a new combat vehicle for the Army, and it takes 10 years. 1 year, 10 years, what's the difference? So we have learned a lot from what we're doing, and I think I point to the things that we're doing and associate the servicing urgent operational needs today, and I say that's the pace at which we have to work in the future. That's the way the world, that's the pace at which the world turns over. So I would like to see our entire system work on the same pace of responsiveness that we're doing in the case of Afghanistan, and now less so, but still in Iraq and now Libya and so forth. The operational pace, pacing our investments. Very healthy.
So unfortunately, we've come to the witching hour. For those of us who have been colleagues and friends of Ash for a long time, we're so thrilled to have him back here. But I would say for all of us as citizens, we're very proud of his service. So let's say thank you very much. This is your daughter?
Yeah.